my loves, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing one of my favourite videos, which is of course my favourite books of 2024. As you can see, it's a rather large pile. I've split them up into first, second and third place categories today. The window is rattling in its frame because it's very windy outside. Apologies if you can hear that. I'll try and edit it out. We'll see how we go. I had a great reading year in 2024. I read so many great books, many of which I will not be talking about today. I have a few more honourable mentions on my Substack if you are at all interested, along with a bit of a breakdown of some of the major stats. I personally love looking at my book stats. Storygraph offers a really easy way of doing that, but I also have my Airtable, which is becoming increasingly elaborate as time goes on, and I can do an updated video on how I use Airtable to organise my reading if you are interested, but I realise that not everybody's reading life looks like mine. Anyway, my loves, before we do that, I was going to tell you about what we've got on offer on Substack and Patreon this year, and I did it in the most convoluted, least clear way possible, so I thought I would just refilm that. Patreon, Substack, if you're wanting to know the way I think of the difference between them, and I do think they perform different things, so it kind of depends what you want, like, whatever. I think of Patreon as like community first. I always say the draw there is not me, it's like the whole community and everybody's pulled reading and recommendations. It's incredible. I've found so many books through that community. We have quite a few meetings, but you can choose options which have fewer meetings if that's not your thing. But I love the meetings. I've got so much out of reading together with other people on there. People who are all across the world and just actually chatting to some of you. It has changed my life. I mean, I don't want to be dramatic, but it has changed my life. Anyway, lest I ramble again. So Patreon is really about the community. It's a book club. And Substack is much more sort of just my writing, basically. I am disseminating knowledge over there. So with Patreon, I'm encountering new books with people, so books I'm less familiar with. We tend to read together things that are new to me. Substack, I'm more drawing on my experience, my past reading, and covering books that I have read, alongside the roundups and stuff like that. So it really depends what you want and your kind of levels of involvement. I have tried to make it so that it's not completely unfeasible to subscribe to both. If you want to dip in and out of both, I will leave a few posts down below, a Patreon post which covers the basics of book club, sort of what is offered on each different tier and some of the information I'm about to tell you, and then I'll also put in my Happy New Year post from Substack, which also has some of the information I'm about to tell you if you want to come back to it at any time. So let's start with Substack. I know that a lot of us are feeling disenchanted, shall we say, with a lot of the platforms that are out there. And I have to say, and I know it can be like intimidating, like adding a new thing in Patreon or Substack or whatever it might be. I have to say I find both much more rewarding than other social media. Not that Patreon's really social media, but anyway. On Substack this year, I'm running a few slow reads and a few courses, and I am really excited about this. It's been stuff I've been thinking about for ages, and I was like, this year I just need to start. Most of it starts in spring because I knew I'd be kind of catching up at the beginning of this year, which I am. So from March to May, I'm going to do a course called How to Read and Analyse a Novel, and I've been thinking about it so much recently, obviously, because I'm starting to make preparations for that. But it's going to do what it says on the tin. I personally have always found so much joy in diving a little deeper into my novels. I think it's improved my reading. I have never found it to take away the pleasure of reading for me, and yeah, just trying to share some of that with you in that course, especially if you are like less familiar with how to break down a novel into its constituent parts and find themes and that kind of thing. From June to August, we're going to do a slow read of Little Big, which I am so excited about. You're about to see me talk about it because it's in my top books of 2024, but I feel so drawn back to that book. I think it's a masterpiece. I think I could write loads of stuff on it and really delve in deep to a slow read, take it slowly, uncover its themes, get into the language. I think it's going to be so much fun. So that's Little Big. September to October, I'm going to do an introduction to speculative fiction, and this is going to be like a slightly more intense. We're going to read some books, I think, on how to read and analyse a novel, but with the speculative fiction one, I think we'll read a few more. It's a little bit selfish because it's really for me to introduce maybe readers of literary fiction to speculative and like what it can do, what it does really well, why I think you should read it. And then finally, November to December, possibly January 2026, we'll be doing a slow read of the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake. Those are just such stunning books. Again, masterpieces, and I think we will have a lovely time slow reading those together. So as I say, Substack is more kind of me writing up posts, getting it out. You can read it in your own time. There are other things I'll be doing for paid subscribers as well, in case you're not interested in specific courses. You'll be able to adjust your notifications, etc., so you won't be bothered by me if you don't want to be. Patreon, I won't go into everything we do over there because it's a lot, but I'll just tell you about the big books that I have planned for this year. So we have a main book club pick, we have like a secondary one which is less meeting spaced if you're interested in that. We have like mini book clubs which cover like hyped books, non-fiction. We have big books. So I'm going to tell you about which big books I put on the schedule for this year. So from March to June we're doing Ulysses by James Joyce. Let's tackle this beast together. I read the Odyssey this month in preparation. July to August, we're going to do Dahlgren by Samuel R. Delany, and I've been meaning to read more Delany for ages. This is like a sci-fi classic. It's a little chunkier, obviously being in the big book section. And thinky. I know when we have a Delany, it's going to be thinky. September to October, we have another thinky book, which is Solenoid by Mircea Cărtărescu, a Romanian author. So many people whose reviews I trust enjoyed this one. Big books is really an opportunity for us to tackle some of those more difficult books together. And then November to December, it's the Brothers Karamazov. Those are the basics. I'll leave those posts down below so you can go and explore a little bit more. But I think if you enjoy these videos, if you enjoy these roundups, I think and hope that you would really like kind of what we're doing in some of these other spaces. And I'm really excited about it. I absolutely love it. I need to gather some testimonials really, but I've had some wonderful feedback over the years since I started book club. Now I Substack. I'm just loving it, loving talking about books so much and loving getting so much more out of my books as well by discussing them with other people. So yes, anyway, I will let you get back into the video now, but I hope to see some of you there. We've got a big pile of books here to get through. I'm going to try not to take too much more of your time because, yeah, I have a tendency to ramble, as we know, and I've obviously covered all these books before. If you go into my Substack post where I talk about these books, you can find the original reviews if you do want to find out any more about any specific book. First, we have The Employees by Olga Ravn, which we read for January 2024 book club, so this time last year, and I absolutely loved it. It's told in a series of statements to a kind of HR-like body. The aforementioned employees work aboard a spaceship. They're orbiting this particular planet, which they're also exploring. And on the planet, they found some objects. They brought the objects into the ship, and they're having strange effects on the staff. Now, the staff are made up of humans and humanoids, and you're not quite sure statement to statement. Sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes it's not. Who's a human? Who is a humanoid? For such a short, slim novel, there was potential here for it to just be like a bit of a flash in the pan. I know I probably read it more slowly and carefully because we were doing it for book club and then got the opportunity to discuss it, which definitely improved the whole experience for me. And you can go back and watch those meetings, by the way. Yeah, I just thought it was really beautiful. It had those human elements which a book like this really needs, those kind of sensory elements. In fact, I think she's a great writer of the sensory, and that's really important in keeping this book grounded. So it's got all these big ideas, but it's also got real grounding in like bodies, which is really important. It's beautiful, it's haunting. I really liked, it did have a storyline as well. It has a storyline. You can find it in the book, which is important to me. And yeah, it's stuck with me. I also love this New Directions cover. I think it's so cool. The British cover is cool too, to be fair, but this one is very cool. Next up, no surprises here, is Little Big by John Crowley. As I said, I loved this book so much, we're doing a slow read of it this year. It is, unlike basically any book I've ever read. It's like a fantasy that is also a great American novel. And it's fantasy in such a way that truly creates, I don't want to say magical atmosphere because that doesn't really capture it. It's like an enchanting atmosphere, but again, that sounds too twee, I think, for what this book actually does. I really think it's like a masterpiece. Like, it is an incredible book, and I'm so excited to read it with some of you. I hope you enjoy it. So it opens with Smokey Barnable, and he's travelling by foot from the city to a place called Edgewater, and when he gets there he's going to marry a woman called Daily Alice Drinkwater, who he kind of doesn't know that well, and he's been told that, you know, he has to walk, he can't ride, he can't take a bicycle, he can't drive, he has to, I think, only eat food that he himself has made, and he has to ask for a place to sleep. He can't like buy a place to sleep, and that is because the Drinkwaters are kind of strange, and Edgewood possibly borders fairy, but Smokey's not quite sure. It's quite wonderful, and I love it. Okay, Erdrich. I have read a couple of her books before. I've liked them but not loved them. I've had like a couple of niggles with them. This one just kept coming back to me through the year after I'd read it. Again, we did it for book club, which no doubt helps. But it's called The Last Report on the Miracles at Little No Horse. And it just touched my soul. It has such a human feel to it. It's kind of meandering and the pacing is all off, and it was not a resounding success with everybody at book club, but for me, I just really loved it. It's about Agnes DeWitt, who somehow finds herself performing the role of a Catholic priest on an Ojibwe reservation. And it's kind of an accident how she ends up there, but then she really takes to it. Yeah, it's about faith in really beautiful ways, and you have to ask the question kind of who is converting who here. I absolutely loved it, and I highly recommend it, and you can absolutely go into it not having read rest of the series, because I did not, but I am going to go back and read Love Medicine and start from the top of the series that this comes from. I think it explores like interconnected characters. Sorry, we're in my first place category right now, by the way. All but one, so apart from Erdrich, of these authors was new to me this year, which is really exciting because now I have more backlists to explore, I have more authors' careers to watch. It's always good when you find new authors that you love, and Isabella Hamad is definitely on that list for me now. This is Enter Ghost, and I just think it's such fantastic literary fiction. It's beautifully written, it's slightly formally ambitious and thematically ambitious in its inclusion of Hamlet. Obviously this is a quote from Hamlet. It's also sort of emotionally deft. The sentences, just sentence to sentence, are lovely. It's wonderful, it's beautiful, and I loved it. It follows Sonia, who I think she's Dutch Palestinian, but she lives in London anyway as an actor. After a disastrous love affair, she decides to visit her sister in Haifa and sort of lick her wounds there. And she hasn't been back there for like 11 years, something like that. And so this brings up a lot of emotions in her, obviously. Personal ones, obviously, but also about her relationship to Palestine and being Palestinian. Made even more obvious, I think, to her when she ends up joining a production of Hamlet in the West Bank. It's an incredible novel, and I just want everybody to read it. So I struggled with this novel at times, but again, it kept coming back to me, it kept niggling at me after I'd read it, and forced its way onto my top books of 2024 as a result. Yes, it's extremely densely written historical fiction about St. Hilda, who lived in 7th century Britain, and she lived at a time when sort of Christianity was taking hold. And so she lives at a time of, you know, great change on the island. You know, there's not even an established kind of England, Wales, Scotland. There's lots of like different small kingdoms. Griffith's writing style really captures that alien feeling, and it's quite poetic, and there's no doubting that it was, you know, a difficult read at times to follow all the different political machinations of all these different kingdoms and to keep track of the names, and then to pass out Griffith's kind of poetic style. But it was really beautiful, and Hild and her sort of relationship to the natural world started to worm their way into my heart, and she became so real to me, and I really missed her when she was gone. So I really recommend this. And this follows her early years, and I'm currently reading Meanwood, which is more of her like young adulthood. And I'm really enjoying it. It's actually much more straightforward than this. So if you make it through this, you can get to Meanwood, which is a bit more straightforward. I think it always says something when I pursue the next in a series not too long after. It's partly because this was so dense, and I was like, if I don't read Meanwood soon, I'm going to forget everything that happened in it. But also because I really loved it. Don't often get the chance to keep a series going. Next we have Ray Bradbury's Dandelion Wine. I tend to make this list as the year, as we go through the year. And yeah, this one made its way on there. One factor that can become quite important when I'm picking out favourite books of the year is the surprise element. Because, we read a lot of books and surprises are few and far between if you read lots. Yeah, being surprised by a book can really make me love it. I think that's why these days I'm operating a bit of a rule whereby I have to reread a book after a couple of years to really allow it to become an all-time favourite, because sometimes I think that surprise element does almost interfere a little bit with my judgment, especially when I come on here and review them and tell you about them. I feel like some of that surprise element might be reduced for you. But anyway, Dandelion Wine, I was surprised by this because it should not work at all, but it really did for me, and I read it in one afternoon. The sun was shining on me and it was just perfect. So purportedly it's a coming of age novel about Douglas Spalding, who's a 12-year-old boy. It's about one summer in his life in 1928, and he's living in a small town in, I want to say, Illinois. But it being Bradbury, it's obviously a little different from that. It's one of his, I can't remember the term now, but one of his novels which is kind of made up of lots of short stories that he had kind of smushed together. And again, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Anyway, it abandons Douglas about halfway through. The stories are sometimes tonally different from each other. There's one just a whole and complete horror story in the middle of it. And although it kind of starts in this realism, coming of age kind of style, it then pivots into these fantastical machines start to appear in Greentown. It kind of gets weird at various points and it's just so strange. But I loved its real honesty. Something about it just touched me. So that's Dandelion Wine, and I will be reading it in a future summer, I think. A couple of books that I haven't yet got my physical copies of, but I will be getting physical copies of. We've got My Friends by Hisham Matar, another wonderful literary fiction book from recent times. So they do exist. It's about Khaled. He is a young Libyan man, and he's convinced to go to the demonstration in front of the Libyan embassy in April 1984 here in London, which was a real event, and he ends up being one of the people who is injured by the gunmen who shot into the crowd that day from the embassy. And this obviously changes the trajectory of his life. He can no longer return home. He is essentially wanted by Gaddafi. He can't even return to university, and so he has to rely on his friends, and obviously it's about his kind of friendships with others who are in a similar position to him, and about life in exile. Matar just has these long, beautiful sentences that really draw you in and really touch something of the human, and it was such an emotional read for me. I teared up multiple times throughout it. It really felt like it came from a place of vulnerability and love for his fellow man, and I really loved it. I just loved reading it. And then we have The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, and you'll know I was very enthusiastic about this, and I'm glad to say a few of you have read this now on my recommendation and have also enjoyed it, which I'm so pleased about. It's definitely dense, it's definitely got a complex layering of narratives going on, but if you unlock it, it is so rewarding. Such fantastic speculative fiction that really trusts that the reader will work it out, that the reader wants a narrative of this complexity and this sort of vivid imagery. Yeah, I don't want to say too much about the style of it or the actual narrative. I feel like it's almost best to go into this one kind of fresh, but it has this really propulsive journey at its heart, which I just could feel the movement in the writing, which is so rare. And Jimenez has this quite kind of poetic writing, but it's still got real body to it. It's just wonderful. I can't wait to see what he does next. We are into my second place category now, and I don't know what it is, but I couldn't put these quite in first place. I think it's because, as you may have been able to tell from this stack and the way I've spoken about them, and I'll say this about Spear Cuts Through Water as well, it felt really touching. It has a love story at its heart, but yeah, you might be able to tell from the way I've spoken about those books that my absolute all-time favourite books are moving somehow. They kind of speak to me on a really like human level, which is difficult thing to describe. So I think that's why these next two books didn't quite make it into the first category, and they're not devoid of humanity completely. And I tend to find books that are devoid of humanity completely not very enjoyable, and it tends to be a big reason why I don't like a book. So it's not like it's not here, it's just not as obvious as in these other books, but nonetheless both these books are really well crafted, interesting, fascinating, and very much worth a read. So this is Embassy Town by China Miéville. We read this together for our Moon Book Club pick, I think, and I'm glad we did because it is a complex novel. Linguists, if you're a linguist, you are gonna love this. So it's set on an alien planet, but humans live there. It's kind of like a super future novel. The people of this planet, the indigenous peoples, they don't look a lot like humans, but they are nonetheless peoples, have a really fascinating language in which is essentially like a truth-telling language. There is no slippage between word and the referent, and it kind of seems to grasp the physical world much more than our own language. You know, the relationship between the humans and the indigenous people is a little bit fraught on this basis, and you know, inevitably things change for both sides. It really dumps you in the middle, this one, so it takes a little while to work it out, but once you do work it out, it's not impenetrably dense to the point where you just have no idea what's going on. You know, there's a storyline here, you know, it's engaging and interesting, but it does take, I reckon, about 50 to 100 pages just to work out, kind of like, just to situate yourself and work out what all the different terms mean and stuff. So it's one of those, but it's so clever. It's such a nuanced and interesting exploration of the relationship between selfhood, language, colonialism, power, and on that basis, I think it's so fascinating. So, highly recommend. Other book in this category is 2666 by Roberto Bolaño, and this is the only one of the big books that we read together last year that has made it into my top books. I somehow couldn't exclude it, and it is a really impressive novel, but frustrating, I think, for a lot of folks as well. Yeah, we read War and Peace last year, we read Count of Monte Cristo, but this one has stuck with me. So yes, I've talked a lot about this one fairly recently, so I'll try and be quick, but it's in 5 volumes, and it sort of nominally revolves around this northern Mexican town of Santa Teresa, which is experiencing a spate of femicides, but all the different sections are quite different from one another. You know, we're looking at a man on the Eastern Front of World War II, we're looking at a group of academics who are like desperately pursuing the author that they've dedicated their lives to. It really holds a lot. And I think it asks some interesting questions. I really like the style, such as I could work it out from the translation, and the sort of shifts in tone, and even like the mini stories within the larger story were really compelling. Highly recommend. I am looking forward to reading more Bolaño. But as that was his last book, I am like, oh, is there anything going to be as good? Okay, into my third place books now. So these books are here for a number of reasons. Either they were so good on a craft level I just couldn't exclude them. I couldn't stop thinking about them, or they felt significant in some way, even if they weren't sort of instantly what I thought of when I thought of my favourite books. Books that surprised me, more surprises that I wasn't expecting to like. And yeah, just stuff that was like unique or noteworthy enough, or just things I felt compelled to tell you about again before the year is out. So as I say, there's so many great books that I haven't mentioned today, and I really do recommend you go back and look through the archives if you are interested or new to me. First we have An Immense World by Ed Yong. I think this is the only non-fiction this year on my top books. This is one of the first books I read last year, and it just stuck with me in the months after I'd read it. Not like it's sort of groundbreaking, but as I say, it kind of pervaded my brain and the way I was thinking about things in interesting ways. It's about how animal senses reveal the hidden realms around us. So each chapter covers a sense, basically, some of which are familiar to us and some of which are much less familiar to us, and explores what we know about that sense and about the experience of the creatures that possess those senses, and of course that tends to be not much. I have this thing this year where I'd quite like to learn stuff off by heart again, because I used to know like whole John Donne poems just off by heart from school and stuff, but I was thinking about this book again because I was reading some William Blake poetry the other day, and of course this book is titled after a line or a couple of lines from one of his poems, which I decided to commit to memory as my first thing I'm gonna try and memorise this year, which is of course, how do you know but every bird that cuts the airy way is an immense world of delight closed by your senses 5. And of course there are wildly different worlds being experienced than ours right here on our world, and I think Jung manages a great balance between sort of science and this kind of personable, quite funny narration. Like, it's not too light but it's also not too heavy, and I think he kind of brings in some literature, he brings in sort of context, and it's just so readable but so interesting, and yeah, I loved it. So I only read one book within this volume. I would really like to read the other 2 this year, but I read Signs Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera this year. This is one of those books which I just think is so good craft-wise that I couldn't help but include it. And I also love reading Lisa Dillman's translator's notes. I've read a Yuri Herrera before. I read his short story collection, 10 Planets, which is so interesting, utterly mad. And I loved reading her note for that. I loved reading it for this. To my mind, I mean, I don't and can't read the Spanish, but she seems like an excellent translator. Yes, so he manages to fit the feel of an epic into just like 100, I think it's like 120 pages, something like that, with this story of Makina, who is a young Mexican woman, and she has to cross the border into the US in order to retrieve her brother, or to find her brother. And she has to kind of go into an underworld essentially in order to do that. And the way he captures and then Dillman captures the atmosphere of that is truly incredible, to be honest. So yeah, I think he's a really interesting writer to watch. On the back here it says, Yuri Herrera must be 1,000 years old. He must have travelled to hell and heaven and back again. He must have once been a girl, an animal, a rock, a boy and a woman. Nothing else explains the vastness of his understanding. And I certainly get that from his writing. It's really unusual and unique. I was very impressed by it. So I'm hoping I can read the other 2 books in here this year, which are Kingdom Cons and The Transmigration of Bodies. So it's really only the first book in this 2-book volume that I particularly loved this year, which is The Shadow of the Torturer by Jean Wolfe, which is the first book in the Book of the New Sun quartet, and I will finish it this year. I'm halfway through. I've read this whole volume, and I need to read the next 2 books. Just really liked this. It's kind of mysterious and strange. Wolfe, I think, has this really unique style, which again, a little bit, I always want to compare it a little bit to Little Big. It somehow creates this otherworldliness, and I'll have to look at it more closely to really pin down why that might be. But anyway, so it follows Severian. The whole 4 books follow Severian, who he's brought up in the Guild of the Torturers. We're in a super future world where everything is essentially crumbling. The sun is dying. Hence being called the Book of the New Sun, I think. You know, it's weighed down by like thousands and thousands and thousands of years of history and detritus, essentially. And, you know, it's so new it feels old, kind of thing, which I don't want to spoil anything, but I can think of a few books which do that as well. Yeah, it's kind of atmospheric. It really conjures, it's something about his words really like conjure images before your eyes. Anyway, we follow Severian. He thinks he's going to become a torturer, but his life is sort of changed by one of the prisoners he's supposed to be keeping an eye on. And it's wonderful. I can't wait to read the rest and sort of find out what happens, because it's quite mysterious. This one comes into the surprise category, and I don't see many people talking about it. So again, I wanted to mention it to you before we finally close out all the 2024 books, and that is Gog Magog by Jeff Noon and Steve Beard. And I'm currently a few pages into Ludluda, which is the book that comes after this, and I really want to finish it, but I haven't quite had time. I think it's intended as a duology, so I'm thinking Ludluda is going to finish the story. It does end sort of halfway through the story, so be wary of that if that annoys you. But it's about Katie Mead, and she's captain of like a boat. This calls it a steam launch. And the world that we're in is this sort of, I want to say like steampunky style speculative world. But one of the things that sort of surprised and delighted me about this book is how unusual it is. It's unusual in style, it's unusual in the world and the people that are in it, and kind of sidesteps a lot of the tropes and rather tired things that you might see in a lot of speculative fiction. And so, yeah, the world building just surprised me, which I really enjoyed. Katie Mead is this really sort of grumpy old woman, if you like that kind of protagonist, and she agrees reluctantly to take a young girl who seems to have some sort of importance and her like robot thrall down this river, and the river is embodied by, possessed by the ghost of a dragon, and they travel through this ghost, through all the different parts of the dragon's body, and it's really interesting and just a lot of fun. So I highly recommend it. I want you to read it. I want more people to read it, and I look forward to finishing Ludluda. Adam Roberts called it pungent, haunting, gripping. I think pungent is a good word for this. It's very sensory, and it's great. We have Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo, which is really a precursor to authors like Yuri Herrera. It's a Mexican classic, and I enjoyed the atmosphere of this one. It's about a young man who, swears to his dying mother that he will find his father, and so he sets out for Comala, and when he arrives, no one seems to be there, and as he makes his way further in, people do begin to present themselves to him, but we're not entirely sure if they are alive. So I don't think that's spoiling it too much. I really enjoyed talking about this one. It's an unusual novel, but I think for someone with my particular literary interests, it was an important one to read, and I enjoyed reading it, and I enjoyed discussing it, and I can still bring some of the opening scenes to my mind's eye. It was so atmospheric. I would love to read that one in the Spanish one day, because I think it's written in a particular dialect, apparently. Next we have Ombre and Shadow, which wins the prize for most beautiful cover of the year. Look at that. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. So this is always kind of fairy tale like in style fantasy, so it kind of is very different from the Robin Hobbs of the world, which recreate psychological realism really, but in a fantasy world, whereas this one is much stranger, much more fairy tale like, and sort of vague almost, but it's really beautifully written, strangely written. I kind of want to read it again to like fully grasp it more, but yes, she does manage to conjure up the feel of something far older, a type of story that's much older with this book, which I think is rare. In it, Ombria's prince has just died, and he leaves behind his young son and his mistress, who are then at the mercy of this strange older sorceress woman, Domina Pearl. I'd be very interested to read Other McKillop to see how it compares. This one I found to be kind of flawed, but then I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I think it sort of impressed itself on my brain. And it's That Old Ace in the Hole by Annie Proulx. And we know I love a bit of Annie Proulx. I just love her writing style. And this one follows Bob Dollar. He's kind of without a lot of direction in life, and so he takes a job with Global Pork Rind and goes down to the Texas Panhandle to look out for spots for new hog farms. Of course, the locals would be hostile to this idea for many reasons, so he kind of has to go and do this undercover and kind of see who will sell up to him. But he finds himself sort of suddenly a part of this community, which obviously leads to a few issues. And it's long, it's meandering. I think I read it at the wrong time, so I didn't read it. I think I needed to read it a bit more condensed to like feel the rhythm, because I do think there could be a rhythm to it, but it felt meandering and sort of scattered to me at the time. But I think maybe it has a kind of iterative rhythm to it, but I need to reread it. I will be returning to this at some point, and I had to include it because it just stuck with me. This is a devastating, exquisitely crafted novel. It's in 2 parts, and the first one follows an Israeli soldier in 1949 who finds and sexually assaults and murders a young Bedouin woman out in the desert. And the second part follows a Palestinian woman who discovers this minor detail in the archive and sets out to discover more about the girl's side of the story, which has obviously been obscured, lost, and this is made doubly difficult for her because she is a Palestinian researcher and not an Israeli researcher. The contrast of styles across the two sections, the way that the theme of the minor detail plays out through it, it is, as I say, an exquisitely crafted book. You can tell, that it took Shibli a long time to write, even though it is so short. I went to see her speak last year, and I think she said it took something like 11 years from start to finish. Obviously not always working on it, but I think you can feel the density of the experience and the pain in this book from all that time sort of germinating for Shibli. And it is based on a real story, so that kind of adds another layer to it. I recommend everybody read it. It's obviously highly distressing. I remember pretty much all of it, like all of the plot points and everything in it. I hope that you will take the time to read it if you haven't already. Next we have another book that I kind of struggled with at times, a little bit like Hild, and in fact I compared it to Hild multiple times as I was reading it. This is Sofia Samatar's A Stranger in Alondria, and again it's quite densely and poetically written in such a way sometimes as that obscures the plot, a little bit like in Hild. It's sort of difficult to follow what's going on, and you think to yourself, well, couldn't she have written this more clearly, more succinctly? But actually it conjures up such atmosphere that I was willing to forgive her, and I think on a second read, knowing now how it moves and where it goes, I think it would be even more rewarding. It's truly sort of a literary approach to fantasy, and it's her version of epic fantasy, which is interesting as well, the way she conceives of and changes epic fantasy. So it's about Jevik, who lives on the Tea Islands, and these are sort of marginal in influence and size and placement, and he gets the opportunity to go over to the mainland, Alondria, which is a place he sort of admires and has read about in books, and has a written culture, and feels more sophisticated to him than his homeland. And this book contains such an interesting exploration of written versus oral culture, about colonialism and power and language and the relationship between those things. And it really made me think, and I look forward to reading more Samatar. I think she's an interesting author. Final book to share, should be no surprise, is Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer. And of course a special book for me, not just because it's the next book in Southern Reach series now, which, some of my favourite books, but also because I got to chat to Jeff about it, which was so exciting and wonderful. So yeah, it's kind of a prequel. I would still recommend reading them in publishing order. I think you get the most out of this book knowing what came in the Southern Reach trilogy, the original Southern Reach trilogy. And it's split into 3 parts, all of which are slightly different from one another in interesting ways. With this one I was really actually impressed with those tonal shifts, and I really noticed them a lot more, and I also really noticed the sort of lyricism and poetics of some of Vandermeer's nature writing. Really unique to him and really beautifully rendered. Yeah, the way he's able to shift tones and registers is really interesting and speaks to his kind of long career in writing now. But yes, my friends, that is everything. I hope you enjoyed. This marks the end of me rounding up my 2024 books. Whilst I have loved talking about these books, I am so ready to talk about new ones with you, and a whole fresh start, and do our courses and our slow reads and our big books and our book club picks. I'm so excited about the year ahead. So thank you everybody for watching today, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!